France, so often idealized for its elegance, its culture, and its grand architecture, hides behind its boulevards and Haussmann facades a crisis that is both urgent and structural: the ability of ordinary people to find and keep a home. What might appear on the surface as simply another cycle of supply and demand is, in reality, a profound test of French society's values, its politics, and its relationship with both Europe and global capital. At the core of this crisis are stark indicators. The housing market has slowed to levels unseen in decades. Sales of existing homes collapsed in the year ending May 2024, falling to historic lows, leaving not just families, but estate agents, construction firms, and local economies paralyzed. The story is similar for new builds. Housing starts and new home sales have collapsed throughout 2024, signaling that future supply is drying up before it even begins. This is not just a cyclical downturn, it is a structural freeze. And the consequences are brutally visible. Over 330,000 individuals in France were counted as homeless in 2021, a number that has almost certainly grown since then, stretching shelters and local authorities beyond their limits. Meanwhile, the much celebrated French system of logement social housing is buckling under the pressure. 2.4 million households are currently on the waiting list. Yet, only a fraction qualify for help, leaving millions in limbo, trapped between unaffordable private rents and inaccessible public solutions. For those who remain in the private market, costs have spiraled to punishing heights. Rents have more than doubled since the 1980s, and property prices continue their upward march, especially in Paris and other major cities. The middle class, once the stabilizing force of French society, now struggles to find affordable housing, while young people face the near impossible challenge of moving out, establishing independence, and building their lives. But how did France arrive here? The causes are many, and they reveal deeper failings. Authorities have consistently failed to make sufficient land available for new housing construction, creating a structural scarcity that pushes prices ever higher. Interest rate hikes since 2022 have made mortgages unaffordable for many households, pricing entire generations out of ownership. Meanwhile, the explosion of second homes and short-term rentals, particularly in tourist-heavy areas, has pulled vast portions of housing stock away from residents, fueling shortages and driving up costs. Cities like Paris, Lyon, and Marseille now compete not just with their own citizens, but with global tourism and speculative investors. There is also the problem of planning. France's land use policies have been described as almost Malthusian in their assumptions, consistently underestimating population growth in urban areas. This miscalculation has left cities underbuilt, overcrowded, and unprepared for demand. The result is a mismatch. Young families and workers cluster into cities for jobs and education, but the available housing stock is locked up, overpriced, or unsuitable. So, what has the government done? Emmanuel Macron's administration has spoken of a supply shock strategy, promising to accelerate construction and free up the market. Laws have been introduced to curb short-term rentals by reducing tax benefits, requiring stricter energy performance certifications, and giving local mayors more power to limit the number of rental days. Co-owners of apartment blocks are being given greater legal capacity to block or ban short-term lets entirely in an attempt to protect housing for residents. Proposals have also been floated to restrict purchases of secondary homes in high-demand, tense areas, prioritizing primary residence ownership over speculative or seasonal use. These measures, however, may not be enough. Critics argue they address symptoms rather than causes. Without a fundamental shift in land allocation, financing, and social housing capacity, the crisis risks worsening. calls are growing for more sophisticated forecasting of housing needs, so that local and national policies are not constantly playing catch-up with demographic realities. Yet forecasting alone will not change the underlying imbalance of power between residents in need of shelter and investors and corporations who see homes as financial instruments. And here lies the deeper truth. France's housing crisis is not only about square meters, rents, or mortgage rates. It is about the meaning of housing in society. For generations, the French prided themselves on solidarity. The belief that the state has an obligation to guarantee dignity in living conditions. Today, that principle is colliding with the cold logic of neoliberal markets, EU environmental directives, and global capital inflows. Macron stands as the reformer, pushing France towards a market-led housing model. Ursula von der Leyen represents the supranational dimension, where EU climate and energy policies reshape the cost and supply of housing stock. And beyond them loom the banks, hedge funds, and sovereign investors who view French apartments not as homes, but as safe havens for global wealth. The tragedy and the paradox is that while France's homes are being securitized and financialized at a global scale, millions of French citizens live in precarity, stuck on waiting lists, trapped in overcrowded apartments, or unable to imagine a future of ownership. Housing, once considered a foundation of the social contract, has become the battlefield of competing interests. Families versus financiers, tenants versus landlords, local communities versus global capital. And if there is one thing we know from French history, it is that when ordinary citizens feel their dignity is under attack, they take to the streets. This crisis, therefore, may not end in quiet reforms or gradual adjustments, but in another eruption of protest, solidarity, and collective action, an echo of France's long tradition of struggle for justice. Yet, as with all of our explorations in homes and humanity, this is not only a French problem. From the broken housing ladder in Britain to the American dream turned into a housing nightmare, and to crises stretching across Europe and beyond, we see the same forces at work. Banks, governments, and global markets reshaping not only where people live, but how they live. Stay with us, because in our next video, we will step further into this global battlefield of housing, where questions of ownership, power, and survival define the 21st century.